let's get to what the papers say and look at all the stories making headlines yesterday on day 2 of Sibos. And for that, we're now joined by Chris Hall. He is the editor of Sibos Issues, and also with us is Heather McKenzie, editor at Daily News at Sibos. Nice to have you both with us, and I understand that you managed to put the paper to bed a little bit earlier, and you managed to get a little bit more sleep. So,
just a little.
So you're feeling better today. Let's start with some of the comments that we had from one of the sessions yesterday with Larry Hathaway. He is the chief economist at UBS. He talked yesterday about the implications for the US economy after the election. He talked about the fiscal cliff and what that could mean possibly for the US economy, maybe teetering it back into recession. Have a listen.
In terms of the election itself, I think the issue that's of greatest concern to investors is whether the election will produce an end to the gridlock, to the impasse in Washington. And the main reason they're concerned is because of the upcoming fiscal cliff. As for those who aren't aware, that's a set of laws that are on the books that will automatically increase taxes for most Americans and also begin to reduce government expenditures next year, with a swing in the federal government budget balance of about 3.5% of GDP. Most observers, including Fed Chairman Bernanke and myself for that matter, believe that if we go off the cliff, we will have a recession in the United States next year, and by implication, a recession in the world economy.
Possibly another US recession. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's certainly a tough situation that whoever wins the US presidential election is going to face. The issue has been kind of kicked down the road for quite some time now, and I guess that can no longer be the case once the election's decided. Obviously, whoever wins is going to have to work with Congress quite carefully in order to pass new legislation. But I think there's a kind of underlying kind of uncertainty that affects everybody here in terms of the US economy, whether it's going to kind of keep powering out a recession or whether it's going to be thrown back in. That level of that kind of uncertainty is a problem for investment, whether it's people investing in their own firms or investing in the stock markets. Mm-hmm. We'd prefer to see an end to some of this uncertainty, but it's not quite there yet.
I think as well the uncertainty puts more emphasis on the emerging markets, which we've seen at this Sibos, that people are looking for growth and they're looking for areas of opportunity, and while you have this uncertainty about the US, people will look at alternative markets and much more closely.
Okay, it's very interesting. Yesterday I was having lunch with quite a few of the bankers here in the ballroom, and we were talking about how ironic the fact was that a lot of these bankers are actually rooting for Obama to win the election instead of Mitt Romney. So it's something that really you wouldn't expect in a gathering of people like this. So very interesting. Let's talk about another speaker yesterday who is making headlines. I'm talking about the president of the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, and he talked about this fact that one size does not fit all when it comes to regulation, that possibly that what is they're hoping would work in Europe and US to facilitate the economy moving again, to de-risk the system, is not necessarily what will work in Asia. Nobuyuki Hirano, president of the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, talked about the need for more flexibility in regulatory frameworks. Have a look.
We should also remind ourselves of the risks that are one-size-fits-all type of regulation, which is in essence Basel III. Regulators must strive to develop flexible regulatory frameworks that, as I said, match each country's or each region's situation. Let me repeat. The series of regulations being put in place in addition to Basel III, such as Volcker rule in the States and ring-fencing rules in the UK, may restrain financial institutions' capability to provide the money to the real economy.
The president of the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi speaking there yesterday at Sibos here in Osaka. Let me just show you, Sibos Issues picked up on that story, talking about exactly that quote. Chris, why did you put it on the front page? You obviously thought it was extremely important.
Well, I think it's I think the issues about global versus local kind of actually run through a lot of yesterday's session. So to an extent, it kind of sums up what happened in that plenary session, but also kind of throughout the conference. Clearly, Hirano-san was very concerned about the fact that the impact of the kind of regulation on Western banks' presence in Asia. But also there was a kind of tendency of Asian regulators, and this was something that was echoed by Simon Tay as well, to perhaps go along with the kind of priorities of European and US regulators, even though perhaps those that Asian banks didn't face the same kind of problems, and as a result of wanting to be good kind of global citizens, then potentially going along with regulatory changes that don't really suit Asia and potentially could dry up SME lending, infrastructure lending, and trade finance.
I want to ask you about another story that you also had on the front page, talking about the story here, talking about where the growth is going to be in Asia in the financial services industry. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think the other side of yesterday's plenary session was that there is a lot of opportunity in a lot of different in a lot of different ways, and we can talk about a lot of the aspiring middle classes who have grown exponentially over whether that's in India or Indonesia or China, other countries that have had big GDP growth over the last 10 years or so. But there's also the unbanked in India, and I think that the chairman of ICICI Bank was quite interesting, quite eloquent, talking about how technology is bringing a lot of the unbanked population of India, in particular, within reach of banks. Traditional branch networks aren't going to work, but the kind of technology that's available today means that a lot of banking services now can be offered to people that previously couldn't benefit.
Okay, Heather, let's talk to you. I want to just show everybody the front. Oops, that's not the front. Daily News at Sibos. But the article that I want to draw to your attention is this one. Huge growth will ride on inter-African trade boom.
The Africa one I thought was interesting because when people talk about the emerging markets, and particularly this week, there's been a lot of focus on China and Asia-Pac. But there's also Africa, because of a lot of interest from China in Africa and investment they've done in infrastructure.
Yes, because we're starting to see the West close out, and it's actually the flow of money is moving directly now between those two continents.
Yes, and Africa is a great area of potential, great region of potential, but also, as one of the speakers said in that session yesterday, that it's still very difficult to do business there, and the enthusiasm for the emerging markets, which is caused, as mentioned earlier, because of the doubts about the US economy and Western economies, really has to be tempered, I think, with understanding that these are very different markets and they have different cultures, and also some of them there are some very poor countries in these regions that it's sometimes forgotten.
And the other thing I want to talk about is this idea of penalties. People in the industry are actually thinking penalties are a good thing.
Yes, this was a survey that was done on T+2 settlement by Omgeo, and it was talking about shorter settlement cycles, which is something I've written about for about 20 years or something, and still writing about it. But the interesting thing about that was that whereas in the past there was a bit of a pushback about do you penalise your buy-side clients for being inefficient and using faxes and telexes? There was always a little bit of doubt about that. They didn't want to increase costs. They didn't want to upset their clients. But this survey found that 2/3 of people actually think that now it's a good time because it will help improve liquidity. It'll improve efficiency, and that's what's needed now. So it's really changed.
Okay, so tell me what's on your radar for today. Day 3, Sibos 2012. What are you looking at today?
Well, I guess we're quite interested in the first ever compliance forum at Sibos. I think this reflects certainly Swift's interest in the area, but also I think the industry as a whole has, as a lot of the kind of post crisis reforms kind of get to the implementation stage, then the sheer weight of regulatory change is something that is quite a kind of resource challenge for the industry. So how best you use data, how best you use all your resources in order to handle the change, and from a kind of tactical and a strategic perspective, I think is quite top of mind for a lot of people. So I think it's quite timely that there's a compliance forum at Sibos.
And you, Heather?
I'd agree with that, and I haven't really thought about today at all yet.
You're like me, I just
I've
take
got a
it
tip from Chris there.
1 minute at a time, 1 day at a time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Best of luck with everything
Thanks.
today, Chris and Heather.